or titling it Album of the Week because I think that'll get more clicks. It's still the same thing. And to us, there is no change because it is still the music club. But I think Album of the Week will get more clicks as a title. So if if there's any confusion, it is the same thing. This week we listened to Outlier by the band 12 Foot Ninja. It was selected by Sam. Why don't you go ahead and give us any why did you select it?
I mean, it's honestly pretty simple. We did Carnival a couple of weeks ago, and as a result, like in relation to them, Apple Music was showing a bunch of Aussie metal or metal adjacent acts, and I went and listened through to some of them. That's how I found out. That Carnival's singer had gone on to do Birds of Tokyo, but I saw 12 Foot Ninja, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the first track was like, I was like, okay, I have to give this a shot. As soon as the hella atonal riff hits in the first track, I was like, okay, this is my jam. On a first listen, I remember being kind of tired and being like, this is a little bit. I mean, it almost feels so Faith No More that like. It almost felt Faith No More enough that it lost me, but again, like the fact that they're including that like kind of cutting edge gent sound, and like again, really atonal, awesome syncopated riffs. It just completely rejuvenates that whole style of music making. So it makes it feel much more like a contribution to that kind of interesting genre hopping canon than just an imitation.
All right.
So yeah, I've known about these guys for like 2 weeks. I didn't really listen. I listened to the full album earlier this week to decide if I wanted to put it in because I didn't know if it was like just that first track was going to be worthwhile.
Right. Yeah.
But
right.
I think the whole thing's worth a listen. The first track's definitely one of the strongest. It is the correct track to open with, I think. But
yeah.
I might disagree on that. Who knows?
Yeah, I don't, but maybe I'll try to create a dissenting opinion. No. I had definitely not heard of this band before. Definitely, like, judging a book by its cover, a band called 12 Foot Ninja is probably not one that I would have immediately gravitated to. It was pretty chill. It was pretty cool. But yeah, I hadn't even heard of them before. I don't think. I mean, if I ever have, I don't remember that.
Yeah, evidently, like one of the highest grossing crowd-funded music videos ever is kind of one of their claims to fame, and they opened for Disturbed when Disturbed was in Australia.
That makes sense.
And that's kind of like,
yeah, I definitely get that'd be a crossover audience for sure. Disturbed fans, I think, would dig this. I also got some because you could tell they listened to like a lot of earlier metal acts that they kind of get some of their tone from. Bands like Avenged Sevenfold or Slipknot, Disturbed, stuff like that. You can tell that they definitely spent some of their younger years listening to some of that stuff and appreciating it. Now, like, their technical work and stuff is pretty different, and, like, the riffs and stuff are pretty different, right? Like, genre-wise in metal, they're in separate spaces.
Again, yeah. to me, it all screams Mike Patton.
Right, for
Like
sure.
everything down to the vocal style a lot of the time. The like hopping between these screams and these kind of rich, resonant baritone. But
Absolutely.
yeah,
And I mean, just in the how variant their music is, how like uh how quickly and effortlessly,
unapologetically.
yeah, they just switch. They just go from one thing to another. For sure, definitely says Mike Patton. Um, like some of their guitar tone, aside from like the obvious just genre stuff, I guess. But like, yeah, even the vocals too, and like it's not like I think that their entirety was inspired by these bands, but I think they took little pieces and when
Yeah,
they're like, we're gonna do this little section here, oh, it's gonna sound a lot like Avenged Sevenfold right here. It's gonna sound a lot like Slipknot right here, and then that's for 10 seconds or whatever.
yeah,
But there's no way that they didn't listen to that music is what I'm saying. At least some of it. I mean, who hasn't, right? What metal fan hasn't, back in the days of Pandora, right? When that's how people
yeah.
discovered new music, right? Had some of that music come on. So, I'm not even saying that they're necessarily big, 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 the big there.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, in general, I mean, there's just
I just I know I talk intentionality in making musical choices
Mm-hmm.
when we're critiquing stuff here, and I can say I can say that like this is clearly the stuff where like a lot of the choices are made in service to the vibe more than like an explicit artistic intent. I think it does convey a very, and this the same reason I connect with Mike Patton's music is because that like really rapid transition without prelude,
Mm-hmm.
or with really minimal prelude a lot of the time, gives it this like mind like fragmented, partitioned mind characteristic to it that has always kind of resonated with me.
Right.
As edgy as that sounds, but like as somebody who experiences my own self in a lot of discrete parts, um, hearing that reflected in music is always really cool, even though it doesn't like it. I think it is intentionally disjointed in places, right?
Right.
It's that there are some transitions and like just tonal changes in life that do hit with basically no with no foreshadowing, right? It's the sort of thing where like if you've ever walked out of a club and just felt your entire mood and being shift because you've transitioned from one space into another, and it was as simple as walking through a door, right?
Right. Yeah. I
I
think
think
that's probably something that a lot of people could, specifically the doorway thing. I mean, I know that that's like a psychological
yeah.
phenomenon. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There's we respond to that, and I think in many ways, them going for that just like, and this is the space we're in now,
Mm-hmm.
right? Actually, does highlight some of that, some of those boundaries delineating chunks of experience, right? In ways that can bring really interesting attention to the dissonance between temporarily quite closely located experiences.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Um.
which could be reading into it too much. I know that reading a little bit of an interview from them, they talked about the fact that on this album versus their first one, they tried to go for a more they were intentionally trying to do a better job of storytelling and focusing less on just riff after riff after riff. And you can
Right.
you can still tell that like this is a band that started with a lot of really good riffs because there's so many goddamn good riffs.
Yeah, and I think the riffs are
Started building out around those.
for sure. I think that's still their strongest suit. I mean, I haven't heard the first album. But really, like, if there's one thing that's gonna hook you as like a music fan or whatever, it's like a metal fan or something like that. It's just the nasty, sick riffs, especially some of the more genty sections and stuff like that. Is really what
And just
you get the
killer
breakdowns and just
guitar and
gong,
bass tone.
gong. Yeah, absolutely. That's sort of what gets you. Because as far as like I can appreciate that they definitely made an effort towards storytelling in the songs. But as far as that, it still is more riff based. It's still definitely more like, I don't know, maybe oriented towards live performance and stuff like that. Maybe, because it feels showy, but not in a way that like is like cocky or something, but in a way that like we know what works, we're doing what works, we're kind of just like hitting hard and playing and having fun and
Yeah, I was surprised because again I just like for whatever reason just like kept playing through this album over the course of this week because it was interesting to me. And finally, because only when I do so many repetitions do I finally get to a point where I actually start to like really dial my brain into the lyrics.
right.
It's kind of interesting how like positive and affirming they're attempting to be in places. I mean, they definitely have a lot of songs that are kind of character assassination's the wrong word, although I guess being called 12-foot ninja maybe it's the right word, but
Yeah.
that are very much exist in response to shitty human behavior,
Right.
and shitty political currents, right? I won't read too much into their intent, but there's certainly a song from the end there that seems aimed at if not a specific person, a type of person that was surging into political limelight in 2016 when this album released.
Oh, yeah.
No comment.
Yeah.
Because they're Aussies, so and again that was the kind of extreme right wing trend was beginning and really catching fire then.
Right.
There had been that tidal wave had been building for some time, but
Right.
it
Sort
was
of the
really starting to
populist,
crest.
far right populist, Yeah.
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 But in general, like, it was really interesting to hear, like, one of the songs that, at least as far as I could tell, is more or less aimed at, like, if it was intended to be aimed at, somebody they knew personally, it works just as well directed at fans, talking about, like, the exact lyrics are, I forget the exact lyrics, but the essential gist is, when will you acknowledge the things in yourself that you are perceiving in me, right? When will you see, like,
Do you know what song it is?
yeah, let me pull it up. Or I'm gonna have to like rapidly browse through all of them and find the one with the right lyric, but
Yeah.
that will not take long.
Yeah.
Because I will say that's something that I have frequently, in a variety of capacities in my life, both when I was kind of working in a personal development role, and something that I've not encountered as an artist but have worried about, right, is the extent to which people kind of project and will cast parts of themselves that are really beautiful and worthy of recognition onto figures they respect because they're not ready to integrate that. And having somebody, I think it's point of view.
Oh yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah, yeah. When will you see the things in you that you find in me? Yeah, the sun, the moon, and the stars, they could never be any bigger than you are. Yeah, an infinite cosmic dance, an atomic romance, a mystery hidden from you, a universe inside you, right? And that's really touching. That's an interesting message to be hearing from a fucking metal act, right?
Right.
I can say, as somebody who has been in and has become something of a black sheep in the personal development industry, there is a bit of saccharine self-help wisdom embedded in those statements, not because there's not a degree of truth to them, but because it's not as easy as that to integrate, right?
Right.
A lot of the time. But it's interesting hearing an artist express a frustration and a concern that I have frequently had with, like, people's relationships to artists in general as these objects of projection and, you know, frequently I believe the term cultural cachet now is parasocial relationship, right? I think it's a lot more. It's frequently much more about projection than it is simply the parasocial relationship. And seeing an artist just name that, and try to, you know, lyrically steer their audience towards greater self-acceptance. There are places where, you know, they're kind of quoting this empowered nihilist worldview that. Again, it works really well when you already sort of innately desire to be a good person. Not everyone necessarily does innately desire to treat people well. So saying, you know, reinforcing the idea that none of it matters in the end, is tremendously empowering for people with guilt complexes, but also like can be made an excuse for shitty behavior. So it's the sort of thing where, like, as an ethicist, I could probably critique some of what's being said here, but seeing them even try, you know, to basically smuggle, you know, psychologically beneficial ideas, you know, whether or not we can say they're totally healthy for everyone, is just cool. It's surprising, particularly within a genre that I think has a community that's generally, you know, much more accepting than they're expected to be, you know, based on how intimidating metalheads tend to look.
Right. And it depends on, I think one thing I've found with metalheads, not to sidetrack too much, is it depends on the community. It seems that a lot of metal bands have these really great accepting communities, but then, you know, you'll occasionally run into the fucking certain bands that just have these super toxic communities, so, you know. Anyway.
No, totally. And, yeah, there are bands that just 100% have Nazis in their fan bases.
Right. Well, and it's sometimes a little more than they
encourage
don't care.
them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. So it's by no means, you know, a totally pure genre, but it is frequently surprising how, you know, compassionate and kind of radically accepting the community tries to be. Not perfect, you know. I think there's, you know, certainly not, you know, we don't see all human perspectives represented in the metal scene with equal proportion, but beside the point. It's just neat to see them trying to use their platform to cultivate just useful, you know, beneficial mindsets in people and try and get people to see what's beautiful about themselves. It's just not the thing you think of when you think of metal, right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that that kind of mindset has definitely become more prevalent in sort of the late 10s, you know, than it was, you know, ever in the past, for sure. I mean, especially 80s, 90s, you know, you're not going to get any of that. Early 2000s, maybe, you know, but Yeah, absolutely. I do think that I can definitely appreciate the positive mindset and sort of more growth built mentality in metal as opposed to just pure nihilism or you know like
Yeah.
ugh, I don't know. I was gonna never mind. I was gonna go into too much of a tangent.
Oh, no worries. You turned into a bit of a robot on my end. That was
Oh,
the only reason I was blank staring. I was like trying to piece together.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
unimportant. The
I think I
listeners
got
heard
most of
it.
it.
Yeah. The
But
yeah, absolutely. Um, one note that I have that I will this will be brief, and I know that I don't know if I think that a certain group of people will agree very heartily, and other people will completely disagree. This might be a contentious. In terms of aesthetics of their music, the whole 12-foot ninja thing, I just like their album covers and stuff being like depictions of like ninjas and shurikens and stuff, but it seems to be a very base level theme in their music and stuff. I mean, they kind of opened with sort of a more Asiatic sounding riff or whatever they it seems like to be their little catch riff. But it seems to be purely
yeah,
aesthetic. There's zero deeper appreciation for any of that, right? There's not a deeper ninja theme in their music or anything. And it bothers me a little bit because it kind of feels like either broy or sort of childish, like sort of ninjas are cool, let's make a band called Ninjas, and that's it. You know what I'm saying? Um, it seems
yeah,
to just be like, it would be like naming, it's like naming your band Imagine Dragons, right? It's just like, dragons are cool, let's make our
yeah,
band Dragons. And there's not, it's not, that has, not to say that that has nothing to do with the music, it's just the type of audience that it attracts. It just seems, I don't know. I don't know. It'd be like naming your
yeah,
band like Batman or something like that. Like it kind of seems too.
yeah,
It's sort of childish and sort of very. It's like masculine, but in like not necessarily toxic way, but um, like I don't know. Do you have a better? Do you understand what I'm saying? Like is there a better way
yeah.
to?
And I think a decent. I think it's like intentionally cheesy.
Yeah.
And the vibe that I get from it, and I actually do agree that because I've made no bones about the fact that I get kind of annoyed when people um, adapt, and kind of take from musical traditions without really making the effort to understand them. And I
Mm-hmm.
totally agree that I think there are cases here where they do utilize some of the aesthetic um, without really paying it proper respect. What I think is going on is it's basically just like a Mortal Kombat aesthetic, right thing. It's like
Right.
intentionally childish.
Yeah. Fair enough.
And it's not it's yeah, it's because this is I do think it's important to remember these are Aussies we're dealing with. Which much greater proximity to Japan and a very different experience of Japanese culture than we get here as a
Yeah.
result, right? Um,
Much less
there's
integrated with
more.
Japanese culture than the U.S. is at this point.
Yeah, but again, well, I mean, they are much closer, and they get a lot of. I know. Australia gets a lot of Chinese tourists, a lot of Japanese
Oh,
tourists.
fair enough.
Um, but I think a lot of it's like as much intended to be like. Again, it's like it's tongue in cheek and self-effacing in a certain way, right? It's sort of again, it's like a very Mortal Kombat. Like they
Right.
open with this cheesy ass fucking gong sound,
Right.
and while I can absolutely agree that like if we look at fucking 90s Mortal Kombat,
Right.
not a really faithful representation of like any of the cultures it's pulling from.
No, yeah, absolutely.
But, you know, I actually need to remind myself who the fuck developed Mortal Kombat, because that frankly might have been, you know, kind of intentional.
Oh, whether or not it was an American
Yeah,
developer?
the movie was American.
Well,
Wondering
yeah, I
about the
mean,
game.
well, movie
Yeah.
is an American,
The
right?
movie was pretty obviously American.
Um,
Yeah.
I believe that
Developed by Midway Games. So yeah. It's an American media franchise. So yeah.
yeah, yeah. I was gonna
Yikes,
say
a
I
little bit.
believe that
Um
it was. Yeah, well, so it just kind of, I mean, it kind of dates it a little bit. Like the aesthetic, I don't know. I don't think that that type of aesthetic is going to be popular in the future. I think that the kids nowadays are a lot more sensitive to cultural appropriation and things like that. And I don't think this is like a super bad like instance of cultural appropriation or whatever. I think that people, I mean, I'm not gonna get too into it because people will get mad at me. I think that people get too mad about cultural appropriation, and to an extent where they deny cultural exchange. But I think that this 12-foot ninja aesthetic just doesn't do them any benefit. I think that so maybe it's just a critique that all it's going to do is serve to turn off a certain section of audience that they may have already had, as opposed to really the amount of people that are going to be like, oh yeah, that's cool, or oh yeah, I get it, is going to be less than the people that they turn off. So they're sort of limiting themselves. And that's
no,
all.
I can agree with that.
Yeah, that's sort of all that I'm not, I mean, it's just like, it was like a little tickle of an irk. It wasn't, it's not like I would not listen to the band for that reason. Certainly there are a lot of bands who have done much worse things that are still very, very popular. Oh God.
And in general, the sense that I get, because I actually did, because of the aesthetic and because of some of the lyrics parsing to me as the sort of thing that's like, this reminds me a lot of the well-intentioned self-help wisdom that gets spun in some really dark ways. Not often enough for people to talk about it, but often enough for people like me to talk about it and become black sheep in their respective industries. But or at least deeply upsetting to the people you talk to at conferences. But I looked a little into their Twitter, and in general,
Okay.
the sense that I get is large of kind of aloofness, which I can only sort of attribute to being, they're Australian. They exist in a totally different media landscape than we do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I can't speak to, I don't have like robust experience talking with Australians, but as of late, I've had an opportunity to talk with some Kiwis and some Australians, and just again getting the sense that what is common discourse varies completely.
Yeah.
By country, right? Particularly when you're talking about that kind of a large geographical distance. So,
Right.
on the one hand, yeah, I can agree. It's 100% reasonable to expect. Like, it's like, okay, maybe we let, like, I think it's fair to look back, to enjoy Mortal Kombat as like the fucking complete cheese fest that it is, but like we don't necessarily need to continue reviving the imagery. So I
Right.
can agree with that critique.
Right.
And less by way of it, less as an excuse and more just as an explanation. Just say, these guys are in a very different media landscape again. I think. And yeah, in general, the vibe I get is one of just like a bit of aloofness, right? Well, really well-intentioned aloofness.
Right.
Which I tried not to let distract me too much from the really fun riffs.
Yeah, the riffs are good.
God damn, are there some really good riffs.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And yeah, evidently their guitarist is their producer, and I will say I listened a bit to their the album before this one. I forget what its name was. He's improved a lot. This like Outlier. Truly, I mean, I believe they outsource their like final mixing and mastering, but he does handle their production.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they got like, but I will say like this stuff comes through so clearly and it's so punchy. This album is very, very, very well mixed and mastered, right? And there are a lot of fun little sound design elements that I think are cool. It's certainly like sound design is certainly not front and center in the way it is with a lot of acts, but like mixing metal is fucking hard, and a lot of what would otherwise be really good metal acts are completely ruined by not just not getting engineered properly.
Yep. Absolutely.
Or because I have infinite love and respect for all the audio engineers out there, not knowing how to work with an engineer properly.
Yeah, I mean, that too. It depends. Like, to a degree, an engineer should be able to guide anyone that's not completely unreasonable to something that's workable. Because I would say 50% of the engineering is a social job, whereas the other 50% is actually doing the engineering itself.
The technical,
Yeah. So, like, I mean, and certainly there are some people that are entirely unreasonable and will say, I only want it this way, it has to be this, and if it sounds like shit and there's nothing you can do about it, and they say, that's what I want, and this is what I'm paying you for, there's nothing you can do about it.
What I'm speaking to more is repeatedly hearing from engineers that it's like there's only so much you can do with a bad take.
Oh,
like,
wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not the engineer's job to...
Exactly.
Well...
And that's what I mean by saying not...
Yeah.
Knowing how to work with engineers properly.
Right.
You know, frequently I think there will be people like, yeah, you can just fix it in post, right? It's like,
oof.
I can make a good take sound really good. I cannot make a bad take sound like it's not a bad take. Or I can make it sound less bad, but it will still sound like it was a bad take.
It'll sound weird. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the more, I think a lot of people don't realize it's the same thing with like film and stuff. Is the more you manipulate it, the more, not necessarily bad it sounds, but the less it sounds like what it originally was. So, like, if you want it to sound super weird and distorted and chopped up and whatever, then, and that's the sound you're going for, great. But if that's not your original intent with the sound, then yeah, I mean, you know, saying you can fix it in post, well, it's going to sound weird and distorted and you know, whatever, because, you know, I'm having to chop it up and do all this stuff. So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I did, as a result of my brief research, encounter an interview with their guitarist / producer, sharing some of his general outlook. And, you know, a huge portion of it was saying, like, if something is out of key or out of time, even if you want to say it's intentional, record it 10 more times until you can be absolutely certain that it's intentional, because just hearing something go poorly and saying, oh, no, that was intentional. If you do that all the time, you just wind up sounding really sloppy.
Yeah.
So if you are gonna say something's intentional, you better goddamn well prove it.
Yeah.
Which again, not that's pretty common. A pretty common perspective, though.
Yeah,
I don't know that.
and
I
it's
would
an
dive super far into that. But
that's an easy vice to fall into for
I
sure.
guess what I want to say is, I guess what I'm trying to say ultimately is that, like, I get that these guys aren't only good because they're well produced. Like, they're also just a really fucking tight.
Oh, yeah,
talented
absolutely.
group.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would say they are talented before that they are well produced. Like, they are well produced, but you could take this band to another producer and they would sound just as good. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, it's not some unique. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Other notes. Oh, this is a very pedantic one, but why is this song about being the last song not the last song on the album? Come on, guys.
Because that's the one that I was saying. That's the one that I was saying was probably directed at, certainly, if not a specific political figure.
Right.
Because the way it's written, it could also totally just be about someone in their lives.
Right.
But, yeah, that one's meant to be. That one.
I'm just saying.
Probably a bit of a tongue-in-cheek joke there.
Yeah. I'm just saying it's a song.
It's the last song written about a specific subject.
Yeah, I know, but it's a
discussed as such
song
lyrically.
about being the last song, and I'm like, you know that at a show they play this song last. Like, you know that they do. Like, I mean, maybe they don't. Maybe they don't. But, like, it's too...
Again, I can see it being kind of tongue-in-cheek as well.
Yeah.
You know, they're like, what if we fake them out with what sounds like the last song, and then there's one more?
Yeah.
You know, it's like on that Offspring record we listened to with the, you know, like 4 consecutive minutes of silence sitting at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that Offspring, that was funny because it's like they waste no space and then, you know, it's just music, 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 and then there's just 4 minutes of silence. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. That, like, I don't have a ton of notes for this band. I mean, I guess I only listened to it once. So, like, you know, I didn't super deep dive it. But also, like, this seems more like, it's not, I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. Like, it's not like, it's not that it's not like, there's no depth to it, because there definitely is. But I think it's easy to state what it is. There's not complexity to the, like, identity of the music. Like, there's complexity to the music itself, but once you've listened to it, you sort of get what they're doing, right? Like, you get that they're like they have the, you know, the very I'm blanking. The switching back and forth between, like, genre and trope and stuff like that, and going fast and slow and stuff like that. They have the sick riffs, and then that's sort of, you know, where they're at.
Yeah. No, it's kind of like a sword swallower at a circus, right? It's like, this is a truly remarkable feat.
Right.
But you know,
yeah,
it's difficult to raise the stakes.
Right, and describing it, what do you say besides a dude put a sword down his throat and then pulled it out? Like, what is there to say besides that? Like, to witness that, there are emotions that you experience, but, yeah, in summary, What? It's 2 sentences long.
Yeah. And I do think, it because there's so much about it that works,
Right.
right? I've certainly been able to go back and take notes, just on, basic like songwriting, compositional technique stuff, like based, just like listening to the kind of tone they're going for, listening to sheerly like how much fucking vocal doubling they're using and how many vocal harmonies they have. Like again, it's really really well composed. And there's a lot of subtle stuff that you don't catch on the first listen that really does add to the texture. So I will say, as a piece of music to listen to, as kind of like a masterclass in a lot of different techniques very quickly, I enjoy it for that. But I can agree that like as an emotional experience, there's not quite as much to unpack.
Right.
It's still very emotionally effective, and again, to me, it's just touching. It's just touching hearing like these attempts at at very positive, using their platform to spread very positive messages, and to, admittedly, again, this is where I get to the aloofness, kind of like without naming names, without real specificity, address some like cultural problems that we're experiencing globally, perhaps to a less excruciating extent in Australia, in circa 2016, almost certainly to a less visible extent.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Rupert Murdoch came from fucking Australia.
Yeah. No, and they hate him there too, from everything that I've heard.
Yeah. Wow. See, the fun thing about Rupert Murdoch is all of his biggest fans here in the United States don't know he exists.
I missed that.
All of his biggest fans here in the United States don't know he exists.
Yeah. Yep.
Besides Tucker Carlson, I guess.
Yeah, I know, right? Like if you.
Who, famously,
But
is noted saying that he is Rupert Murdoch's bitch, and that he would lick his shoes and do whatever he's like Daddy Murdoch said or something like that. Go look up the clip. He literally said
you almost have to give him points. You almost have to give him points for the sheer honesty about the level of debasement he has been willing to undergo. But I refuse.
No,
to
according to Glenn Greenwald, Tucker Carlson is. According to Glenn Greenwald, the fucking Pulitzer-winning fucking journalist, Tucker Carlson is a socialist. Yeah. Sorry.
Refuses to.
But he
to actually advocate for anything resembling socialism.
Yeah, he's a populist. I think Glenn needs to retire. He also said Steve Bannon is a socialist, so like Steve Bannon is literally the opposite of a socialist.
Oh, so he's thinking National Socialist Party. I see.
Yeah.
They weren't using the word correctly, Glenn.
That's not off. That's not. That's
it was false advertising, Glenn.
Only barely a joke. It's so close to being just true.
But yeah, I can agree that it is, and I think this is at least the experience that I have had with. I think this sort of mirrors the experience that I have had with Faith No More to a certain extent. I will say that I think Mike Patton in general does a much better job of getting inside the head of other people and writing from that perspective, whereas these guys are a little more coming from their own perspective. And I will admit, to my ears, I'd sometimes come across as a little preachy in a really, really well-intentioned and touchy way. in the touching way, but like it's stuff that's like, yeah. But that's as much grounded in my own jaded perspective as anything else. Because again, I can't accuse them of not meaning well. I think they do mean really well. But I think you can run into some of the same issues you run into with Mike Patton's music, where it's like there's so much spectacle that even when there is kind of deeper shit going on, it's really easy to miss. I don't think there's as much of that here as there is in some of Patton's music, most of Patton's music, because I'm an unapologetic fanboy and no one will ever stop me. But that's because he's doing character studies, right? He gets a lot of really biting social commentary in just by inhabiting somebody else's head in a way that feels reasonably accurate. But again, it has certainly rewarded repeat listens for me. And again, I do really think more as a masterclass in how to do a lot of different musical things successfully. Which, I suppose we could say that, a really well-written architecture manual isn't necessarily something we would call a massive artistic achievement, even if it is the sort of thing that engenders further ones.
Absolutely.
Or I guess we could say it is still an artistic achievement, right? It's just the scope to which the extent to which it can be appreciated is more as like a technical accomplishment than like something truly soul-shifting and world-shattering. And again, it is the fact that there is genuinely soulful shit going on in here.
Yeah,
is cool to me. It's just you can hear the limitations in those perspectives. Again, I think that's the way a lot of writers like David Byrne, Mike Patton, to a certain extent, people like Trent Reznor. Those are the people I know. There are plenty of songwriters who do it well. Annie Clark, St. Vincent, also excellent job of being personal and also sometimes getting into other people's heads. And you can sometimes express much more profound things through those character studies.
Absolutely.
Than by trying to like just say a worldview. Or like present a worldview. But I still think there's a lot to like. But yeah.
Yeah.
I feel you.
Yeah, it's not deeply emotional. There is emotion conveyed, but it's not deeply emotional. For sure. Like, yeah, it doesn't mean that there's not artistic value. Absolutely.
But yeah, I think in many ways some of the tongue-in-cheek quality restricts the ability to be sincere. Right?
Yeah.
And to convey something much more deeply moving, right? And you'll get glimmers of it in the same way that you can kind of get glimmers of somebody's soul through a dark joke they make, but like
cheers
it's
to
often
that.
not as intentional as it seems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, cheers to that. Okay, it's 3:55. I don't have any other notes, so if you want to hop into ratings.
You want to lead off?
Sure, let's go. Listenability. This one's tough. Kind of depends on the day, depends on what I'm doing. Kind of similar to last week with the Iron Maiden. It's like, although I would say this is probably more listenable for some people than Iron Maiden and less to others.
Yeah.
I could definitely use this as background music a lot more. But background music to what? That's the question. Working out? Sure. Playing video games? Sure. Reading a book? Probably not. It depends on the book, I guess.
God.
Sex? That might be wild. I can think of other fast metal and stuff that might be better for sex, though. Regardless, 6, maybe 7. Depends on what I'm doing. Let's see, musicianship, good. I'm not a super big fan of the vocal style. But that's just personal taste. That's not them being bad by any means. I think it's just sort of maybe the deeper male vocals and stuff, and the way that they sort of reverb it to make it sound kind of throaty. I'm just not into that. Like, I don't know. But they have like a lot of really good technical work that you can hear and partake in a buffet of throughout the entirety of the album. There's not a single song that falls flat. There's not really any moment where you're like, this sucks. You know? Yeah. Unless it's purely a taste thing. Like, if you don't like this music, then yeah, you might think it sucks. But like from a purely technical musicianship standpoint, there's not a single moment that is lacking. So let's say 8.5. I think they really do it up. Let's see. Cohesion. It's not cohesive. All the songs have very similar vibes. You can tell it's the same band and all that. They're not necessarily written to be played back to back, but they're not necessarily written to not be. It doesn't feel like this album is like a piece where they're like, this is a whole album that's meant to be listened to all in one sitting, otherwise you won't get the perspective or something like that. And it's not that they have like these it's not like it flows from one song, what is the fucking word, transition, between one song or another. So like I think it's kind of middling in its cohesion. It's definitely not startlingly uncohesive, but that's not the category where they're gonna win points, so I'm gonna say 6. And what's the last one? Listenability, musicianship, weird factor.
Weird factor? Yeah.
This one's the hardest one. Because if you took any one of their riffs by itself and you just listened to that riff, they would not be weird at all. I mean, they're talented, they're good, but like isolated, you're like, oh, okay, here's this thing. And if it was just that sound, not that weird. I mean, maybe a little weird, but not super weird. The combination
I hear a lot of stuff that tries to be, that like kind of tries to nail. I don't mean to cut you off, but I hear a lot of stuff that tries to nail that the sound that they get on the opening track with, again, the like they've got a lot of, you know, they're playing a lot of tritones together, but like that like syncopated, super dissonant. I hear a lot of stuff that tries to do that, but doesn't manage to be that tight and feel that much like a functioning riff rather than a wall of dissonance.
Right, but okay, but the very fact that there's a lot of stuff that tries to do it, like,
yeah,
obviously them doing it better than other people does set them apart in originality and weird factor. Like, it'll give them 1 point. It's not going to give them 5 points. So this one is tough, but the combination of things is certainly weird, and the band as a whole, you know, everything, the whole package is certainly they are their own thing. They're definitely doing it their own way. Like a band like this could never get like, I don't know. I shouldn't say that. I would. It's tough because in many ways they are very odd, but they are odd in ways that other bands are also odd, but not in the exact same way, so that kind of makes them more odd. So, like, face value, they're not weird. Like, if you had no knowledge of, like, the deeper or whatever of the music, like, if you didn't like metal at all and you listen to this, you'd probably be like, that's just whatever. So it's really tough for me. Because part of me wants to say, like, 8, but part of me wants to say, like, 6. But 7, I don't know. I'm going to say 7.5. It kind of goes back and forth. There's a lot more weird stuff than other stuff. Yeah, it's really tough. And I think given on a different day, I would probably say a different number. So, yeah. You can go ahead with yours.
Yeah. I think for me, I agree that it's kind of hard, like, with listenability, because I'll say that I listened to this album a fuck ton this week. I do not know how long that is going to last. Because I think there are a lot of things that they're doing really well that I kind of want to understand so that I can figure it out, reverse engineer it, and then do my own thing with it. And then I don't think I'm going to necessarily want to listen to this so much anymore. Right? Once I've, like, figured out what works about it. I think right now it's, like, obsessed me as, like, a problem I'm trying to solve, but I'm not really certain what the, like, shelf life of that interest is going to be. I think you know, a number of singles, again, the opening single, I think, like, their opening 3 are all really, really solid. I think I'll be able to come back to those and listen to those and enjoy it. Do I think this is the sort of thing that by the end of the year I'm going to consider listenable enough to just put the entire album on to play? Like, on a regular basis? Probably not. I think it merits revisiting, but I can tell that right now I'm like a dog with a bone with it, or I'm like, okay, there are a lot of things that I really, really dig, and I want to figure out what they're doing. And once I figured out how to do it for myself, I might lose some interest. So, that being said, I agree that it works for working out. It works in a surprising number of contexts. Probably not reading.
Yeah.
So I'll say overall listenability, I kind of have to agree with you. It's probably somewhere in like a 7.5 range. I think when you're in the mood for it, like, again, for me, there was like that atonal riff opening up One Hand Killing was like, it's perfect. Just dopamine, this massive dopamine rush, and I can keep going back to it, and like a pigeon hitting a button over and over and over and over. It has yet to yield diminishing returns, but it's going to get there eventually. And it will become probably a more sporadic re-listen at that point. So yeah, I can give it like a 7.5. In that, you know, I think I will always, like, if I were to hear it come on somewhere unexpectedly, I would be like, oh, cool. I'm down to, you know, listen for the track. But if somebody's like, yo, let's listen to the whole album right now, I'd have to be in the right mood for it.
Yeah.
Musicianship, yeah, really, really fucking high. I like 8.5. I almost want to verge it into 9 territory, but it's kind of like, I agree that it's the sort of thing where, like, they figured out what works really well, and they figured out how to convey the sense of a genre, and the fact that there are, like, just flat out jazz solos, you know, scattered throughout. I'm like, that's cool. but I think 9 is where you start to get into like really, really boundary pushing territory, you know, like pushing the art forward. And I don't know that there's necessarily as much of that there. These guys are really competent, and they're really, you know, they're like the kind of musicians that I would be able to bring in on basically anything and trust they'd be able to work really well. But like, if I want something that's really advancing, you know, my own concept of what's possible, I might look to their guitarist a little bit, because he's managed to do the atonal riff thing better than I've heard it done. But the rest of it, they're just really goddamn solid. And I do rather like, I think because I've listened to so much Mr. Bungle and Faith No More, I do rather like their vocalist's voice, but I can also appreciate that it's an acquired taste, particularly given that we just don't have a lot of baritone representation in music.
Yeah.
And when we mix to emphasize that, it can be kind of jarring.
Yeah.
Particularly when you're already dealing with a lot of really down-tuned, like, low-frequency instruments. Yeah. So yeah, musicianship, I'll probably agree and give it. I'll probably give it like an 8.75, because I think, no, 8.5. I agree with you. Weird factor. Again, it's hard. Because Mr. Bungle and Faith No More were doing this shit in the 90s.
Right.
And they were doing it incredibly well. And I think if Mr. Bungle and Faith No More had been established in the 2010s, they also would probably have included gent influences in there.
Yeah.
In their music. That style had not really come into being yet. Which could kind of start a whole nother, you know, it makes me think about, you know, a lot of conversations about like collage artists, right? It's like we can agree that that's a transformative art form onto its own, but it is fascinating that it's one of the only art forms that is dependent on other art forms for its existence. I mean, all art kind of is, you know, we're all carrying forth and evolving patterns that we've heard from other people for the most part, or recombining them in our own unique ways. So in many ways, we're all collage artists, right? But like being very intentionally pastiche. Is sort of its own interesting territory, and I think that's a lot of what Mr. Bungle was doing, a lot of what, and by extension, a lot of what Faith No More was doing, and that's a lot of what these guys are doing. So because that kind of genre bending has been a thing for a while, it's not new. I do think it's still weird.
That's fair.
It's intentionally. I mean, it's intentionally choosing something that to a lot of people basically means you've become musically incomprehensible.
Yeah.
Like playing a little bit of these guys for Kayla, as soon as they went into some of the funk breaks, she's like, what why? And sometimes the answer is just because you can. Or again, if you're, I do think it does really accurately capture that feeling of walking through a door and suddenly finding yourself in a different space. And that kind of disjointed unreality feeling that is very, very familiar to me. Even if I wouldn't necessarily talk about it and convey it in all the same ways. So I think it's still weird. It's not totally new, but it's embracing a mode of a style of self-expression that is going to be polarizing inevitably, and I have to give them points for being willing to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm gonna vex you and go with the 7 that felt like it was too much of a compromise.
Fair enough.
Because they definitely know who, like, I can hear their influences, but they're carrying it forward and doing their own thing with it and having fun with it. So, and just choosing to do something that weird, particularly in the era of streaming. Good for them.
Yeah.
That leaves us with cohesion. From what I can tell, there's like some stuff that's written from a more personal perspective, and some stuff that's more about like the eponymous 12-foot ninja, right?
All right.
There's like kind of a martial arts movie arc going on. I'm not certain how they're supposed to be connected, other than that they are both clearly, about harnessing personal power.
Mm-hmm.
Harnessing a kind of inner wellspring of energy. Those themes crop up throughout both the more personally oriented songs and the more within whatever fiction is taking place here songs. I think it's mostly the opener and the closer actually that are very clearly like a martial arts movie storytelling.
Right.
But I agree that there's enough similarity in their sensibility that was almost reaching the point of getting me to dock listenability points for like some sameness, because I will say, while there are a lot of really tasty, really crunchy riffs in there, like they're utilizing a lot of the same tricks over and over and over and over and over, which makes it similar and I guess sort of definitionally cohesive, but like it also feels like they're just sort of just sort of lingering in the same space sometimes, without a real purpose to it, other than that's just where they're comfortable, right? So yeah, I think the whole album hangs together well. There are definitely some highlight moments. I wouldn't say that all of them are like, it's just nothing but bangers. Right, I think they front load a lot of the really good tracks, and then towards the end they get some. There's still neat sonic moments throughout, but like, yeah, it's kind of hard. I almost have to give it like either a 5 or like a 6, just because it's tonally consistent, and they do a good job of like selling me on their genre transitions, even though they mostly do that by just committing,
Right.
and going like, nope, this is where we are now. So I have to give them a point or two for that, but at the same time, it feels more like a collection of songs on the same subject,
Yeah.
bookended by these kind of martial arts movie moments. I could be totally wrong. I'm not very good at paying attention to lyrics, and I'm sorry. Which I think gets me through the 4. I'm sorry that my breakdowns always go so long. I have too many thoughts. Or just it takes me too long to organize them.
Yeah. Yeah. I was trying to think of the meme. Head full, many thoughts.
So yeah, what's your overall then?
Overall. Having only listened to it once, admittedly, I'm gonna have to say like 7, maybe 7.5. I just don't think I enjoyed it as much as you do as a guitarist. It is good. It's just not specifically what I listen for when I'm listening to metal. So, I don't think I can appreciate it to its fullest value. But it's good. Yeah. I think I've said in this, hour or whatever, I think I've said all the things that I have to say about it, There's a lot there, but at the same time, it is lacking in certain substances that I personally desire when seeking music. So,
For me, it's going to have to be like an 8.
Mm-hmm.
Both because I can appreciate a lot of what's going on technically, and just because I've realized that I tend to gravitate towards stuff that has these really jagged, lurching, like counterintuitive rhythms, because I think that, to me, does a very good job of expressing sonically the kind of awkwardness in my own being that I feel.
Mm-hmm.
And hearing somebody express it in a way that still sounds cool
Mm-hmm.
is just nice. It's nice. It's nice to hear. It's nice to hear that, like, again, lurching, like halting, disjointed rhythm and set of ideas. It's nice to hear somebody talking about that. It's weird to say that you feel a kind of camaraderie there, but
Mm-hmm.
and I again could be 100% completely incorrectly reading into it, but I know, at least when I examine why I find those rhythms that appealing, that's certainly the answer I come up with.
Mm-hmm.
So hearing them do it well is just, yeah, it's very pleasing. I can say that that's the whole reason I give them points, is because I think a lot of people try to capture this sound and it just comes out like sloppy
Yeah.
and noisy, whereas this, I think, does a really good job of remaining staggered but still clean and still well performed. Because I think in general, like, if you're gonna go for those really weirdly emphasized rhythms, it has to be tight, otherwise it just sounds like bad playing.
Right.
Which again, I think, if you if you can read into that, that very idea that it has to be tight or it just sounds like bad playing, explains a lot of my own perfectionism. But because a lot of the ideas that I have, until they're tightened up, do just sound like mindless babble. And hearing somebody clean it up and get it sounding good is just nice and kind of cathartic for me. So yeah, I'll give it an 8.
Awesome. Alright, well, you fuckers know what to do. Hit that like and hit the subscribe and hit the little notification bell. Follow me on Twitch. I need 50 followers, you fuckers. I'll say, anecdote time. I have a friend, an internet friend, not someone I've met in real life, who is like a model who like does OnlyFans and stuff. And they streamed for the first time the other day, and they got like 30 something followers in like one day. And I'm like, on Twitch, I'm like, oh my god, I've been streaming for months. I don't have that.
It's all about the time slot.
Yeah, and it's about knowing your audience, and it's about building an audience and stuff, and they already have an established audience that I don't have, so it's not, I'm not.
That's true. I mean, if you're an Instagram model, they probably had.
Right, exactly. So it's not that I'm comparing my success to another person's, it's that, I want followers, bitches.
This is a competition now?
No, it's the opposite. I want everyone
Our
to
darling Ethan is the underdog.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
Help Ethan get his numbers up.
Yeah. If you've watched this far and you're not subscribed, what the fuck, dude? Come on, man. Actually, you know what? Subscribers matter less on YouTube than they ever have. There are some people who have like 10k subscribers and will get like 500,000 views on their videos, and it's wild. Because YouTube has essentially neutered subscription to the point where...
the algorithm.
Yeah. So, as long as you're watching, I actually don't care. I mean, Twitch, it does matter because they won't give you money until you have a certain number of subscribers. And I guess YouTube is the same way, but it's only 100 on YouTube. And 100 YouTube subscribers is not the same thing as 50 Twitch followers. I think that Getting one YouTube video view is not equal to getting one view on Twitch. You can make a lot more money per person on Twitch. If you do make money. I mean, obviously I'm not at the point where to make money. But if you do make money, it's way more per view on Twitch. So, I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying, but follow, like, subscribe, do all the things. And we'll be back next week with something. We'll see if Brian puts something in. If not, I have some backups. One of which is one that I've been wanting to do for a little while, so we'll see. Anyway, adios. Have a nice day. Yeah.